Ancient stories of a great flood echo from every culture on Earth. This video will show you how a real catastrophe 12,000 years ago could have inspired them all and changed human destiny forever. We will sift through geological evidence that points to a global cataclysm and examine the ruins of a forgotten world. You will see how a single event could have drowned entire continents, erased early civilizations, and forced humanity to start over. What if the myths are not just stories, but a warning from our ancestors? How do you rebuild a world after everything is washed away? The stage for this drama was set by a world in transition. The last great ice age was retreating, its colossal glaciers melting back to reveal new landscapes. For centuries, the climate had been warming, allowing forests to spread and vast grasslands to support an incredible array of life. Woolly mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats were not creatures of a distant, frozen waste. They were part of a thriving, temperate ecosystem that stretched across continents. Human communities, adaptable and intelligent, had spread into these newly hospitable territories. They were hunters, gatherers, and early settlers, learning the rhythms of this post-Ice Age world. Life, while always challenging, was finding a new equilibrium. Then, with shocking speed, that equilibrium shattered. The planet plunged back into a deep freeze. This period is known to scientists as the Younger Dryas, a 1,000-year winter that descended roughly 12,800 years ago. Temperatures in some regions plummeted, ice sheets advanced once more, and the generous grasslands that fed the megafauna began to shrink. For the human societies of the time, it was a profound and sudden hardship, a climatic reversal that must have seemed like a punishment from the skies. But this bitter cold was merely the prelude. The true cataclysm was still waiting in the wings, a consequence of all that melting ice held in precarious balance. To understand the force of the coming flood, you must first understand what that ice was holding back. Buried within the earth itself, a silent witness holds the first real clue. Scattered across the globe, from the fields of North America to the peat bogs of Europe, researchers have identified a strange, thin layer of sediment deposited right at the start of that 1,000-year winter. This is the Younger Dryas boundary, and it reads less like a chapter in a geology textbook and more like the forensic report of a planetary crime scene. Within this dark stripe in the soil, scientists find a bizarre and unsettling cocktail of materials. There are microscopic diamonds, known as nanodiamonds, which typically form under the extreme pressures of a cosmic impact. There are tiny magnetic spherules, little melted beads of rock that could only have been forged in a sky heated to incredible temperatures. And perhaps most telling of all, there are elevated levels of a rare element called iridium, which is abundant in asteroids and comets but scarce on the Earth's surface. Now consider what this means. You do not get a global layer of impact debris from a gradual shift in weather patterns. You do not get diamonds raining from the sky because of a slow change in ocean currents. This specific combination of materials is a fingerprint, and it points to a single, terrifying source, a collision from beyond our world. The leading theory suggests a comet or asteroid, perhaps one that fragmented in the atmosphere, unleashing a hailstorm of fire across continents. The immediate effects would have been apocalyptic, igniting wildfires on a scale we can scarcely comprehend, turning forests into ash and filling the skies with a pall of smoke and soot that would have blotted out the sun for years. This is the smoking gun that transformed the flood story from a collection of ancient myths into a serious subject of scientific debate. The ground itself is telling us that 12,800 years ago, the sky fell. But a sky filled with fire was only the first act of this disaster. To see the second, you must travel to the arid plains of eastern Washington state. Here, spread across thousands of square miles, lies one of the most bizarre landscapes on Earth, the Channeled Scablands. It looks like the surface of an alien world, a place of deeply gouged canyons called coulees and towering cliffs that stand above dry riverbeds. Most incredible are the giant potholes, some as wide as a city block, and the immense dry waterfalls like the 400-foot-high Palaus Falls, which today is just a trickle compared to what once flowed over it. For years, geologists looked at this scarred terrain and assumed it was carved slowly over millions of years by rivers and wind. But one man saw something different. In the early 1920s, a geologist named Harlan Bretz began mapping the Scablands. He looked at the sheer scale of the erosion, the immense gravel bars stranded high on hillsides, and the giant ripple marks, some 30 feet high and hundreds of feet apart, still visible on the valley floors. His conclusion was radical, and it made him a heretic in his field. Bretz proposed that this entire landscape was not carved slowly, but violently, in a matter of days or weeks by a catastrophic flood of unimaginable power. He argued that a vast inland sea, glacial Lake Missoula, held back by a crumbling ice dam, had suddenly ruptured. When it did, a wall of water taller than a skyscraper exploded across the land, moving at highway speeds and scouring the bedrock down to its bones. The geological establishment was horrified. They clung to the doctrine of uniformitarianism, the idea that the present is the key to the past, that geological change happens gradually. A single, world-altering flood sounded too much like biblical catastrophe, not sober science. For decades, Bretz faced ridicule and outright hostility at scientific meetings. But he persisted, gathering more and more evidence. The breakthrough came when researchers finally identified the source, the immense bathtub ring left by Lake Missoula on the mountainsides of Montana, proving a body of water large enough to cause the devastation did indeed exist. In a beautiful moment of scientific vindication, the very colleagues who had opposed him for years eventually presented Bretz with a prestigious award, acknowledging he had been right all along. The Scablands are a terrestrial blueprint. They prove our planet holds within it the capacity for sudden, apocalyptic flooding. They show us exactly what water can do when it is unleashed all at once, carving canyons, moving mountains of gravel, and reshaping continents in a geological heartbeat. If this could happen in the Pacific Northwest, what might a similar rupture on the decaying ice sheets of 12,000 years ago have looked like, but on a continental, even global, scale? The scars in Washington offer a terrifyingly clear model. The evidence for a great flood is not just written in the rock but mapped beneath the waves. Our third clue lies in the silent, sunken landscapes that now rest on the ocean floor. During the last ice age, with so much of the world's water locked up in mile-thick glaciers, global sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are today. This exposed vast continental shelves, creating land bridges and fertile plains that have since vanished beneath the sea. Modern sonar technology acts like a deep-sea time machine, allowing us to map these lost territories in stunning detail. One of the most famous is Doggerland, a sprawling, low-lying plain that once connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. This was not a barren tundra, but a diverse landscape of hills, rivers, marshes, and forests teeming with wildlife. It was a home, a hunting ground, a thoroughfare for the people of that era. Then, as the world warmed and the ice melted, the waters began to rise. For generations, it was a slow creep, a gradual change that communities could adapt to by moving their camps further inland. But geological records suggest there were also pulses of rapid sea level rise, surges where the ocean could have advanced by meters in a single human lifetime. Imagine watching the horizon of your known world slowly disappear, season after season, knowing the high ground you retreat to today might be underwater in a few decades. The final drowning of Doggerland was likely a drawn-out tragedy, a relentless loss of territory that compressed populations and erased entire chapters of human prehistory beneath the North Sea. This pattern repeated across the globe. In Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf formed a continent-sized extension of modern-day Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. In the north, the land bridge of Beringia connected Asia to the Americas, a cold but passable highway for life. Perhaps most intriguing is the theory of the Persian Gulf Oasis. During the Ice Age, the Persian Gulf was a dry, fertile valley watered by the Tigris, Euphrates, Karun, and Wadi Batin rivers. It would have been an ideal refuge, a lush haven surrounded by deserts. Then, as the glacial meltwater poured into the world's oceans, the Indian Ocean breached the Strait of Hormuz. Scientific models suggest the valley could have been flooded in a matter of years, transforming a paradise into a marine basin. The displacement caused by such events is difficult to overstate. These were not empty lands, they were core territories, the heartlands of early human groups. When they flooded, the people living there did not vanish. They migrated, carrying their stories, their technologies, and their trauma with them. They moved to higher ground, into regions already occupied by other groups, leading to new conflicts, new alliances, and a sudden compression of cultural innovation. The rapid loss of these vast, resource-rich coastal plains would have been a catastrophic blow to human societies, a driving force behind mass movement and cultural change that echoes in the archaeological record. The ocean floor, therefore, is not just a graveyard for landscapes, it is a lost library of human experience. Its inundation provides a slow-motion, yet profoundly catastrophic, mechanism that perfectly complements the instant violence of an impact and a glacial flood. Together, they form a one-two punch that could reshape a world. But if civilizations were lost to these rising waters, could any trace of them possibly remain? The true power of water lies not in its gentle flow, but in its restraint. Picture an ice dam, not a simple wall of frozen river, but a mountainous plug of glacial ice 3 kilometers thick. Behind it, trapped meltwater from a retreating continent accumulates into an inland sea of staggering proportions. This was Lake Agassiz, a body of freshwater so vast it once covered an area larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. For centuries, it was a stable feature of the North American landscape, held in check by the sheer mass of the Laurentide ice sheet. But ice is a dynamic, living substance. As the climate warmed, that dam began to weaken from within, developing tunnels and fissures from meltwater pressure. The failure, when it came, was not a slow leak. It was a structural collapse of continental scale. Think of a concrete dam giving way, but on a magnitude that dwarfs human engineering. The ice barrier shattered, and the entire contents of Lake Agassiz, a volume of water measuring in the hundreds of thousands of cubic kilometers, was unleashed in a torrential pulse. This was not a river flooding its banks. This was the sudden, violent creation of a new ocean current, a deluge that would have scoured the land from the interior plains to the Arctic Ocean, reshaping the geography of an entire continent in a single, terrible event. The physics are terrifyingly simple. Water seeks its own level with relentless force. When a barrier holding back a sea of it vanishes, that water does not politely arrange itself. It explodes outward, carving new channels, drowning everything in its path, and delivering an immense surge of cold, fresh water directly into the world's oceans. But the flood itself was only the local disaster. The global consequences were far more insidious, and they hinge on a delicate system we often take for granted, the great conveyor belt of the sea. The Atlantic Ocean circulation is driven by a process called thermohaline circulation. In the North Atlantic, warm, salty surface water from the tropics flows northward where it cools, becomes denser, and sinks into the deep ocean, beginning its long journey back south. This sinking action is the engine of the conveyor belt. It drives currents, distributes heat, and essentially regulates the climate of the entire northern hemisphere. Now, imagine pouring a colossal volume of cold, fresh water, the entire contents of Lake Agassiz, directly into the North Atlantic at the precise location where this sinking occurs. Fresh water is less dense than salt water. This massive freshwater lid would have floated on the surface, acting like a cap on the engine. It would have stalled the sinking process, shutting down the conveyor belt. With that oceanic heat pump switched off, the warm Gulf Stream current that moderates Europe's climate would have weakened or diverted. The result, a dramatic and rapid plunge in temperatures across the northern hemisphere, a climatic shock that matches the geological record of the Younger Dryas cold snap perfectly. So here we have a single mechanism that ties the entire cataclysm together. An impact or climatic shift weakens the ice dams. The dams fail, unleashing apocalyptic floods that drown coastlines and reshape continents. The floodwater surging into the oceans disrupts global climate systems, triggering a 1,000-year winter. It is a cascade of disasters, each one triggering the next, a domino effect of planetary proportions. This hypothesis provides a tangible, physical explanation for how a localized geological event could ripple out to reset the clock for life on Earth. But if the waters rose and the cold descended, what happened to the people who were there, the societies that witnessed the sky falling and the seas rising? Their story is written not in ice cores or sediment layers, but in something far more enduring, the myths passed down by the survivors. Myths are not just stories, they are cultural memories, passed down through countless generations like a whispered secret that slowly changes form but never loses its core truth. Among all these ancient narratives, one stands out for its stunning detail and its haunting resonance with the geological evidence, the story of Atlantis. We find it not in some obscure scroll, but in the works of the great Greek philosopher Plato, written around 360 BCE. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes a powerful and advanced island nation located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar. He paints a picture of a sophisticated society with grand architecture, complex laws, and immense wealth, a civilization that had tamed its environment and reached a golden age. Then he tells us it was gone. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and vanished. Now, Plato was a philosopher, not a historian. Scholars have long debated whether Atlantis was a literary device, a moral allegory about the dangers of hubris and corruption created to illustrate his ideas about the ideal state. And that is likely a part of its purpose. But the vivid, almost technical description of its destruction is curiously specific for a mere metaphor. It speaks not of a slow decline, but of a sudden, violent, and aquatic end. This detail, this single day and night cataclysm, echoes with a chilling familiarity. It mirrors the geological testimony of rapid sea level rise pulses and the catastrophic flood models from glacial lake outbursts. Could it be that Plato was recording a much older story, a tale that had filtered down to him from Egyptian priests, who in turn claimed it came from a time 9,000 years before their own? That timeline, if taken seriously, places the origin of the story right in the heart of our cataclysm, around 11,500 years ago. The idea is not that a literal island continent with Bronze Age warriors existed in the mid-Atlantic. Rather, it is that the core elements of the story, a coastal or island-based culture of relative advancement, suddenly lost to the encroaching sea, could be a cultural fossil. A thriving community on a fertile plain like the now submerged Persian Gulf Oasis, or on continental shelves like Doggerland, would have seemed like an island of prosperity to its inhabitants. Its rapid inundation, whether over years or decades compressed in the telling, would have been an unforgettable trauma. The story of that loss, of a golden age drowned, could have traveled with the displaced survivors, becoming embellished and mythologized over millennia until it reached Plato's ears as the tale of a mighty empire. The power of the Atlantis narrative lies in this resonance. It is not a standalone myth but part of a global chorus. From the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, where the gods decide to send a flood to wipe out humanity, to the biblical story of Noah, to the flood legends of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and Australia, the same core story repeats: a great deluge sent by higher powers to cleanse the world, with only a few warned survivors left to rebuild. This consistency across isolated cultures, from the mountains of Greece to the deserts of Mesopotamia to the jungles of the Amazon, is statistically staggering. It defies coincidence. These are not stories that were traded along merchant routes in recorded history. They are foundational to the identities of these peoples. The shared thread suggests a shared experience, a global trauma so profound it etched itself into the collective psyche of humanity. The waters rose, the good lands vanished, and only those who reached the high ground lived to tell the tale. Over thousands of years, the specific details of places and names faded, but the emotional truth remained, crystallized into legend. The flood was not a punishment, but a memory. Atlantis was not a place, but an event. The story of Noah may be the most famous, but it is far from the only one. Across the world, in cultures that developed with no known contact for thousands of years, the same essential narrative emerges again and again. In ancient Mesopotamia, centuries before the Hebrew Bible was compiled, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a man named Utnapishtim. The gods, weary of humanity's noise, decide to send a great deluge. But one deity takes pity, whispering to Utnapishtim through a reed wall, instructing him to dismantle his home and build a great vessel, loading it with his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. After the flood subsides, he releases a dove, a swallow, and finally a raven which does not return, signaling dry land. The parallels are unmistakable. Then look across the world to ancient India. In Hindu tradition, the god Vishnu, in the form of a fish, appears to a pious king named Manu. The fish warns Manu of a coming flood that will destroy all life, instructing him to build a massive ship. As the waters rise, Manu ties a rope to the fish's horn, and Vishnu guides the boat safely to a mountaintop, where Manu becomes the progenitor of a new humanity. In the Americas, the Maya Popol tells of a flood sent by the storm god Huracan, a great resinous downpour that wiped away the wooden people of an early, failed creation. The surviving gods then fashioned humanity anew from maize. From the indigenous peoples of Australia to the native tribes of North America, from the lore of ancient China to the sagas of the Norse, the flood motif is a universal thread. This global tapestry reveals a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. The stories, though dressed in the unique cultural garments of their people, share a core architecture. First, there is a divine decision, a judgment or a cleansing. Then, a chosen individual or family receives a warning, often through subtle or secret means. Next comes the construction of a means of salvation, a boat, a raft, or an ark. The cataclysm itself destroys the old world, washing away the mistakes of the past. Finally, the waters recede, the survivors offer gratitude, and humanity is given a solemn promise or a fresh start. These are not just tales of survival, they are foundational myths about renewal, about the fragile contract between humanity, the divine, and the natural world. They answer a deep, primal question: how did we get here, and what almost wiped us out? The sheer geographical isolation of these cultures at the time these stories were first told is the most compelling clue. The Maya of Central America had no contact with the Sumerians of the Middle East. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia were separated by vast oceans from the tribes of the Pacific Northwest. They did not trade these stories like goods. They each grew their own version from a shared, deeply buried seed of memory. This points not to a shared fiction, but to a shared experience, a trauma so vast and so formative that it imprinted itself on the collective consciousness of our species. The details blurred over millennia, the names of gods and heroes changed, but the central, terrifying event, the world drowning, remained. These myths are the echoes of that event, reverberating through time. But if the stories are the echo, where do we find the original sound, the tangible proof of the societies that were lost? The search leads us to a place where myth and geology might finally meet. Perched on a remote hilltop in southeastern Turkey, a series of immense stone circles silently defies the narrative of human progress. This is Göbekli Tepe, and its discovery in the 1990s sent shockwaves through archaeology. The site is staggeringly old, dating to around 11,600 years ago, a time when, according to our textbooks, humans were simple hunter-gatherers living in small, nomadic bands. Yet here, these so-called primitive people carved, transported, and erected massive limestone pillars, some weighing over 20 tons, arranging them into precise, circular enclosures. The pillars themselves are works of art, covered in intricate reliefs of animals, foxes, scorpions, vultures, and lions, frozen in a stone menagerie. This was not a settlement, not a village, but something else entirely. A ceremonial sanctuary built on a scale that implies organization, shared belief, and coordinated labor long before the invention of agriculture or permanent cities. It forces us to ask what brought these people together, what inspired such a monumental collective effort at the very dawn of our era. The mystery deepens with the site's fate. After being in use for over 1,000 years, Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned to the elements. It was meticulously and deliberately buried. Every enclosure, every towering pillar, was filled in with thousands of tons of soil and rubble, a conscious act of interment that preserved the structures in near-perfect condition until their rediscovery. Why would a culture go to such enormous effort to build a sacred space, only to spend further centuries carefully entombing it? Some researchers propose a symbolic end, a ritual closing of a holy place whose time had passed. But given the timeline, another, more haunting possibility emerges. The burial of Göbekli Tepe around 10,000 years ago places this act squarely within the climatic turmoil of the Younger Dryas. This was the precise epoch when the world was emerging from its 1,000-year winter, when meltwater pulses were raising sea levels, and when the memories of a great cataclysm would have been most vivid. Could the burial have been an act of preservation, a way to protect their most sacred site from an encroaching tide of not just water, but chaos? If the world was experiencing climatic instability and societal upheaval, sealing away the heart of their spiritual world might have been a profound attempt to safeguard knowledge, to hide the old ways until a safer time. Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent witness, a monument from the very edge of that lost age. Its construction shows a level of social complexity we never attributed to that time, and its burial suggests a people deeply concerned with legacy and memory. It does not prove a flood, but it offers something equally powerful, tangible evidence of a sophisticated society existing right when the cataclysm is said to have occurred, a society that felt compelled to hide its greatest achievement from the world. What were they trying to tell us or save from us by putting their temple to sleep? The silent stones of Göbekli Tepe are not the only mystery from that pivotal era. At the very same time these pillars were being buried, a great and terrible vanishing was sweeping the planet. The world lost its giants. Across North America, the mighty woolly mammoth and the towering mastodon disappeared. The formidable saber-toothed cat with its iconic elongated canines vanished from the landscape. In South America, the car-sized giant ground sloth and the armored glyptodont were gone. This was not a slow decline over millennia. This was a rapid, catastrophic extinction event that wiped out over 70% of the Earth's large animal genera. a die-off so complete it reshaped entire ecosystems forever. For decades, science has offered two primary suspects. The first is us, the idea that newly arrived human hunters, with their sophisticated tools and cooperative strategies, hunted these magnificent creatures to extinction. The second is climate change, the shifting patterns at the end of the Ice Age that altered habitats and food sources. Yet, when examined closely, both theories contain puzzling gaps. Human hunters were undoubtedly present, but the extinction was global and simultaneous, affecting islands and continents alike, often in regions with very sparse human populations. Climate change was certainly underway, but these animals had survived numerous glacial cycles before. Why would this particular warming period, even with the Younger Dryas cold snap, prove so uniquely fatal to so many different species across the globe? The sheer speed and breadth of the die-off points to something more sudden, more violent. This brings us back to that thin, dark layer in the soil, the Younger Dryas boundary. The evidence embedded there suggests a third, more apocalyptic actor. The Clovis comet hypothesis proposes that a fragmented comet entered Earth's atmosphere over North America roughly 12,800 years ago. The result was not a single crater, but a series of immense airbursts, explosions in the sky with the force of nuclear detonations. The thermal radiation alone would have ignited continent-spanning wildfires, turning forests and grasslands into an inferno. The soot and dust lofted into the upper atmosphere would have blocked sunlight, triggering an impact winter, a sudden and profound global cooling. Now, consider the chain of events from an animal's perspective. First, the sky literally catches fire, incinerating vast swaths of your habitat and food supply in an instant. Then, a deep, prolonged cold snap descends, stunting the regrowth of plants for generations. The combination is a 1-2 punch of unimaginable force. Large, specialized animals like mammoths, with their long gestation periods and specific dietary needs, would have had no time to adapt. Their populations, already under stress from a changing climate, would have collapsed almost overnight. This scenario also explains the human dimension of the tragedy. The people of this era, the Clovis culture in North America and their contemporaries elsewhere, were not just hunters, they were partners in an ancient ecological balance. These megafauna were not merely prey, they were central to culture, economy, and survival. They provided food, hides for shelter and clothing, bones and ivory for tools and art. The sudden loss of these keystone species would have been a civilization-shattering event. The very foundation of their way of life crumbled. Societies that had developed intricate knowledge around tracking and utilizing these giants found their world empty, their expertise suddenly obsolete. This forced a dramatic and rapid adaptation, a scattering and restructuring of human groups that may be etched into the archaeological record as a period of cultural fragmentation and innovation born of sheer necessity. The megafauna extinction, therefore, is far more than a paleontological curiosity. It is a potential casualty report from a global cataclysm, a direct link between a cosmic event, climatic chaos, and the desperate struggle of humanity to endure. The disappearance of the giants left a silent world, and in that silence, the survivors had to learn an entirely new way to live. Beneath the soil of the American Southwest, a dark line tells a story of fire. Geologists and archaeologists call it the black mat, a distinct charcoal-rich layer found at numerous sites across the continent. It is not just a stain, it is a time capsule, a moment of profound change captured in sediment. At locations like Murray Springs in Arizona, this dark band sits directly on top of the distinctive stone spear points of the Clovis people. Above it lies the cooler, barren sediments of the Younger Dryas period. The Clovis artifacts end abruptly at this boundary, as if a curtain fell on their world. The mat itself is a forensic puzzle. It is loaded with microscopic charcoal, the residue of vast, intense wildfires. It contains soot, the kind that fills the air when entire landscapes burn. Most tellingly, it holds a spike in a specific type of fungal spore, one that thrives on the dung of large herbivores. This spike suggests a sudden, catastrophic die-off of megafauna, their bodies left in such numbers that these fungi briefly flourished. The message is chillingly clear. First came a continent-spanning inferno, then the silence of a world emptied of its giants. This was not a local forest fire, it was a planetary fever. But the evidence of that day grows even more extreme. At a handful of sites, including a location in South Carolina known as Topper, researchers have found something even more astonishing mixed within this dark layer: tiny pieces of melt glass. This is not ordinary glass. It forms when sand or rock is subjected to temperatures so high, upwards of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that it vaporizes and then rapidly cools back into a solid. Such temperatures are far beyond anything a normal wildfire can produce. They are the signature of a cosmic impact or a massive airburst, the kind of energy released when a fragment of a comet or asteroid explodes in the atmosphere. In some samples, this glass contains microscopic diamonds and shows signs of shock, a crystalline structure warped by immense, instantaneous pressure. This combination, the charcoal of global wildfires lying side by side with material forged in a celestial furnace, paints a terrifyingly vivid picture. It suggests the fires were not sparked by lightning or human hands, but by a rain of fire from the sky itself. Imagine the experience of the people living through that moment. The day would have begun like any other. Then, a series of blinding flashes on the horizon, brighter than any lightning, a roar that shakes the ground, followed by a wave of searing heat. The horizon in every direction begins to glow, then ignite. The sky, choked with smoke and falling debris, turns from blue to a hellish orange, then to an impenetrable, sooty black that could last for days or weeks. The sun, blotted out, becomes a dim copper disk. The air grows cold, and a fine ash begins to fall like a sinister snow, coating the scorched earth in a gray shroud. For the Clovis hunters and the animals they relied upon, it was an ecological and cultural apocalypse. Their hunting grounds were reduced to ash. The herds they followed were incinerated or scattered, their food web shattered in an instant. The very knowledge of their world, the migration patterns, the water sources, the edible plants, was rendered obsolete by a geography of charcoal and ruin. The black mat is the geological tombstone for that world. It marks the end of an era defined by mammoths and megafauna, and the brutal, fiery beginning of a 1,000-year winter. This layer of ash and melt glass is the tangible link between the cosmic trigger and the climatic collapse that followed. The sky fell, the earth burned, and in the terrible silence afterward, the survivors faced a new and desperate question. How do you find water when the world is made of ash, and what comes after the fire? The black mat tells of fire from the sky, but the true reshaping of the world came with the water that followed. While the immediate aftermath was a cold, ashen landscape, the planet's great ice sheets had been dealt a fatal blow. Their meltwater had to go somewhere, and it did not drain away quietly. For generations, scientists viewed the end of the Ice Age as a slow, steady rise of the oceans, a gentle creep of perhaps a few millimeters per year. But the geological record tells a far more dramatic story. By drilling core samples from ancient coral reefs and coastal sediments, researchers have uncovered a startling rhythm to the drowning of the continents. The data reveals not a smooth line on a graph, but a series of violent jerks, periods now called meltwater pulses. During these pulses, global sea levels did not inch upward, they surged, rising by several meters over the course of a single century. Imagine the ocean advancing not by the length of a foot each year, but by the height of a person every generation. One of the most significant of these events is known as Meltwater Pulse 1b, occurring roughly 11,500 years ago. This was not a distant geological abstraction, it was a lived reality. For the human communities clinging to the fertile, low-lying coastal plains that had been exposed during the Ice Age, this pulse would have been an existential crisis unfolding within living memory. A grandparent might have told stories of a shoreline miles further out where they hunted and gathered as children. A parent would have watched familiar islands slowly shrink. A child might have witnessed the final, storm-driven surge that swallowed their ancestral fishing grounds forever. This was the slow creep becoming a sudden surge, an inexorable encroachment that redrew the map of the world within a handful of human lifetimes. The concept of home, of a stable territory passed down through generations, would have dissolved before their eyes. Sacred sites, seasonal camps, and resource-rich estuaries simply vanished beneath the waves, not in a mythic single day, but in a relentless, terrifying progression that left no doubt about the outcome. Each storm season would have eaten away more of the known world, pushing populations inward, compressing them against the territories of others, and creating a pressure cooker for conflict and cultural change. This geological data provides the physical mechanism that turns myth into plausible history. It shows us how the stories of a great flood could have been born not from a single, globe-encircling deluge, but from this traumatic, generation-spanning loss of land. The ocean's rise was the final, inescapable chapter of the cataclysm, a quiet drowning that completed the work begun by fire and ice. A submerged world lies beneath the tranquil blue of the Persian Gulf. Today, it is a shallow sea, but 12,000 years ago, this was not water at all. It was a sprawling, fertile valley, a lost refuge that some researchers believe could be one of the most important missing chapters in the human story. During the height of the last ice age, with sea levels over 100 meters lower, the Indian Ocean stopped at the Strait of Hormuz. What is now the seabed was a vast, low-lying basin, fed by four major river systems, the Tigris, Euphrates, Karun, and the now-vanished Wadi Batin. Fresh water from these rivers would have pooled into lakes and marshes, creating an oasis of staggering fertility in a region otherwise dominated by harsh deserts. This was the Persian Gulf Oasis, a potential Garden of Eden, a lush haven that could have supported dense populations of plants, animals, and most importantly, people. Geological core samples taken from the floor of the Gulf tell a clear story. They reveal layers of ancient river gravels, silt from freshwater marshes, and even pockets of peat, the preserved remains of wetlands. This is not the sediment of a deep ocean. It is the fingerprint of a drowned landscape, a green valley that existed for thousands of years. Computer models that reconstruct past coastlines show this basin was not a barren salt flat, but a viable, even attractive habitat. It offered reliable water, abundant game, and rich soils, the perfect conditions for early human groups to settle, thrive, and perhaps even develop the first inklings of complex society, sheltered from the harsher world outside. This oasis would have been a cradle, a protected nursery for cultural innovation. Then the cradle was overturned. As the great ice sheets melted, global sea levels began their relentless climb. For generations, the people living in the basin would have witnessed the ocean's slow advance. The shoreline at the Strait of Hormuz would have crept inland year after year, decade after decade. But geological evidence suggests this was not always a gentle process. There were likely periods of faster rise, pulses where the ocean breached natural barriers and pushed salt water further into the freshwater system. The final inundation may have been relatively swift, a matter of centuries rather than millennia. Imagine the experience of a community whose world was defined by rivers and marshes. They would have watched the saltwater poison their freshwater lakes, seen their hunting grounds shrink, and been forced to retreat, step by step, up the river valleys that were their connection to this paradise. The high ground they retreated to was the edge of the Arabian desert, a stark and unforgiving contrast to the lost fertility behind them. This was not a migration by choice, it was a forced exodus, a diaspora driven by drowning land. The displacement of these populations is the key to a profound mystery. These refugees did not arrive empty-handed. They carried with them their knowledge, their technology, their social structures, and crucially, their stories. As they moved northwest following the very rivers that once fed their homeland, they would have entered the region that would become Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Here, over thousands of years, their descendants built the world's first cities, invented writing, and composed the earliest great works of literature. Among the oldest of these texts is the Epic of Gilgamesh. In it, the wise man Utnapishtim tells the hero of a great flood sent by the gods, a deluge that wiped out all of humanity. He describes how he was warned to build a great boat to save his family and the seed of all living things. The parallels to later flood stories are unmistakable, but its origin may be more than myth. Scholars like Dr. Jeffrey Rose have proposed that the Gilgamesh flood narrative is a cultural memory, a story that began not with a global ocean, but with the traumatic, generation-spanning loss of the Persian Gulf Oasis. The story evolved over millennia, magnified by time and retelling, transforming a regional ecological catastrophe into a divine punishment of cosmic scale. The valley's drowning became a world-ending flood. The careful boats used to escape the rising waters became a massive ark, and the painful exile from a green refuge became a covenant for a new beginning. This hypothesis offers a powerful bridge between geology and mythology. It provides a tangible, plausible setting for one of humanity's oldest and most widespread stories. The loss of that fertile basin would have been a searing, formative trauma for the people who endured it, an event so significant it shaped their identity and their understanding of the gods and the world. That memory, passed down for hundreds of generations, could very well be the seed from which the great flood myths grew. It suggests that the story of Gilgamesh, and by extension the story of Noah, is not a work of pure fiction, but a legend rooted in a profound historical truth, the drowning of a forgotten homeland. If this fertile refuge was lost, pushing people and ideas into Mesopotamia, what other forgotten societies might have vanished beneath the waves, leaving only the faintest echo in our collective memory? Seismic surveys have painted a ghostly map of that vanished continent. By sending sound waves through the murky depths of the North Sea and reading their echoes, researchers have traced the contours of a world we thought was lost forever. The data reveals not a flat, featureless plain, but a dynamic landscape. Rolling hills once rose from the earth, river valleys carved intricate networks across the terrain, and large lagoons and marshes provided rich habitats. This was Doggerland, a name taken from the Dogger Bank, a submerged sandbank that was once its high ground. For thousands of years, as the ice retreated, this land bridge was the heart of Europe, a superhighway for animals and the Mesolithic hunters who followed them. It was a place of abundance where communities could thrive on the herds of reindeer, the aurochs, and the red deer that grazed its grasslands, and the fish that filled its waterways. This was not a peripheral wilderness, it was a core territory, a central home. Then the world began to change. As the great ice sheets continued to melt, sea levels began their long, relentless climb. For the people of Doggerland, this was a slow-motion crisis witnessed over generations. A favorite hunting camp by a riverbank might become a seasonal island, then vanish completely within a person's lifetime. The coastline was not a fixed line, but a constantly retreating frontier. Communities were forced to adapt, moving to higher ground, watching their known world slowly dissolve into the encroaching sea. This gradual loss, this inexorable shrinking of their homeland, would have been a profound source of anxiety and cultural memory, a story told around fires for centuries. But the final act of Doggerland's disappearance may have been far more sudden and terrifying. Around 8,200 years ago, a catastrophic event occurred off the coast of Norway. A massive section of the continental shelf, known as the Storegga Slide, gave way. An area of seabed the size of Scotland plunged into the deep ocean, displacing an unimaginable volume of water. This displacement triggered a devastating tsunami that radiated across the North Atlantic. Waves estimated to be over 10 meters high would have slammed into the remaining coastlines of Doggerland and surrounding regions. For any community still clinging to the low-lying marshes and river deltas, it would have been an event of absolute horror, a wall of water arriving with little warning, scouring away the final remnants of that once great plain. The Storegga Slide tsunami provides a chillingly precise analog, a more recent example of how a single geological event can deliver a catastrophic flood. It shows that the concept of a great wave swallowing the land is not mere myth, but a geological reality. The drowning of Doggerland, therefore, was likely a two-part tragedy, a slow, generational retreat punctuated by a sudden, violent coup de grace. This layered loss imprinted itself deeply on the survivors who fled to the higher grounds of what are now Britain, Denmark, and the Netherlands. What stories did they carry with them? Folklore from these coastal regions is rich with tales of sunken cities and lost lands, like the Welsh legend of Cantre'r Gwaelod, a fertile kingdom said to lie beneath Cardigan Bay, drowned when a well was left unattended. These stories, passed down for hundreds of generations, rarely speak of a global flood. Instead, they tell of a specific, beloved place that was lost to the sea, a local tragedy magnified by time into legend. They are the cultural fossils of a real event, the echo of the day the water finally won, and Europe's heartland slipped silently beneath the waves. This loss reshaped the map of a continent and scattered its peoples, setting the stage for the isolated island cultures that would later emerge. If such a well-documented event could vanish so completely from written history, surviving only in myth and geological data, what does that tell us about the even older cataclysms we are trying to uncover? The stories we tell are more than entertainment, they are the scaffolding of our shared reality. When a community survives something incomprehensible, the mind cannot simply file it away. A trauma of that magnitude demands meaning, a story to contain the terror and make the world feel orderly again. This is where anthropology offers a vital lens. Scholars who study human cultures observe a profound pattern. Societies often process their deepest collective wounds by weaving them into myth. The Great Flood narrative, appearing across the globe, is a prime example of this psychological alchemy. It takes the raw, chaotic horror of a real event, the drowning of a homeland, the loss of countless lives, and transforms it into a structured tale with a beginning, a middle, and crucially, a moral end. The themes are universal: purification through water, divine judgment for some perceived failing, the survival of a chosen few, and the solemn promise of a rebirth. These are not random plot points, they are the components of a coping mechanism on a civilizational scale. Think of a child who experiences a sudden, frightening event. They might replay it in their play, giving themselves agency in a story where they had none. A culture does something similar, but on a grand, generational canvas. The unexplainable calamity becomes a flood sent by the gods. The senseless destruction is reframed as a necessary cleansing, a painful reset for a world that had lost its way. The arbitrary fact that some people lived while so many others did not becomes the story of a righteous family, warned and spared because of their virtue. This narrative transformation serves multiple profound purposes. First, it provides explanation. It answers the agonizing question of why, replacing chaotic chance with divine intention, however severe. Second, it offers control. If the disaster was a punishment, then future calamities can be avoided through proper behavior, through ritual, through obedience to the new rules handed down after the waters receded. This is the birth of covenant, of a sacred contract between humanity and the powers that be. The sheer scale of the loss described in our earlier sections, the drowning of fertile coastal plains like Doggerland or the Persian Gulf Oasis, would have been more than a geographical change. It was a rupture in identity. The very land that held their history, their burial sites, their seasonal routes was gone. The way of life built around that land vanished with it. In the face of such emptiness, new social structures would have had to form rapidly. Shared stories of the disaster would have bonded scattered survivors into new, tighter communities. The need to appease the forces that caused the flood could have catalyzed the formalization of religious practice, creating a specialized class of storytellers and ritual keepers, the first priests. The imperative to remember the warning signs, to build boats or seek high ground, would have elevated practical knowledge into sacred lore. This cultural shift fundamentally altered the path of human evolution. We moved from simply reacting to our environment to seeking to interpret it, to placate it, to find deeper patterns in its chaos. The flood myth, in all its variations, may be one of our species' first and most successful attempts at collective therapy. It allowed generations to carry forward the memory of the cataclysm not as a paralyzing horror, but as a foundational lesson. It embedded resilience into our very mythology, teaching that even from total destruction, a new beginning is possible. The stories ensured that the trauma did not break the survivors, but instead forged a new kind of cultural strength, one built on memory, meaning, and a desperate hope to never be so unprepared again. But a compelling story is not the same as proven fact. For every researcher convinced by the fingerprints of catastrophe, another raises a skeptical hand, urging caution. The mainstream of archaeology and geology has long been built on a foundation of gradualism, the principle that the world we see today was shaped by the slow, steady forces of erosion, deposition, and climatic shift that we can observe in the present. From this viewpoint, the idea of a single, sky-falling, earth-drowning event 12,000 years ago feels like a dramatic overreach, a return to an unscientific past where gods and monsters explained the unknown. The pushback is not mere stubbornness, it is a necessary rigor, the scientific process demanding extraordinary evidence for an extraordinary claim. Critics point first to the impact hypothesis itself. While the presence of nanodiamonds and magnetic spherules in the Younger Dryas boundary layer is intriguing, some studies have questioned whether these materials are truly unique to that time period, or if they could have formed through more mundane, terrestrial processes like widespread wildfires. The search for a definitive crater or craters from that specific era has so far come up empty, leaving the comet theory resting on indirect, circumstantial evidence that some argue is open to multiple interpretations. The megafauna extinctions, too, are seen through a different lens. Many paleontologists maintain that the primary drivers were a combination of climate change altering habitats and the relentless, sophisticated hunting pressure from expanding human populations. They argue that the die-off was not as simultaneous as it appears in the broad brush of deep time, but a staggered process that unfolded over centuries across different continents, better explained by the complex interplay of ecology and human ingenuity than a single apocalyptic trigger. And what of the flood myths? From the academic perspective of comparative literature, the ubiquity of the story is less mysterious. Water is the ultimate symbol of chaos and rebirth in human psychology. Great rivers like the Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, and Indus have flooded their banks for millennia, providing both life-giving silt and periodic, localized destruction. It is entirely plausible, skeptics suggest, that these recurring traumatic experiences with rising water, common to agricultural societies, independently spawned similar stories of divine judgment and survival. The story of a great flood, in this view, is not a shared memory of a global event, but a powerful, resonant archetype that emerged naturally in separate cultures facing similar environmental challenges. This academic debate is not a weakness in the cataclysm theory, but its greatest strength. It forces the hypothesis to be tested, refined, and held to the highest standard of proof. The questions raised are valid and essential. How do you definitively prove a comet strike without a crater? How do you separate the effects of a sudden impact winter from the broader trends of a warming planet? How do you distinguish a cultural memory from a literary motif? These challenges are immense, rooted in the simple fact that we are trying to reconstruct a single bad day from 12,000 years ago, using fragments of evidence that have been buried, eroded, and reinterpreted for millennia. The true path forward lies not in choosing one narrative and dismissing the other, but in the tension between them. It is in this rigorous back and forth that science slowly closes in on truth, separating the seductive allure of a lost advanced civilization from the more nuanced, yet still astonishing, reality of a profound global trauma that reshaped our ancestors' world. The cataclysm hypothesis does not need to explain every mystery to be significant. It simply needs to provide a better, more coherent fit for the growing pile of geological and anthropological puzzles than the gradualist model alone can offer. And that is where the investigation turns next, from debating the cause to examining the most profound effect, the silent void left in the archaeological record, and the haunting question of what might have been lost. The gap in our history may not be empty but filled with echoes of forgotten knowledge. After a cataclysm, survival demands every ounce of a community's energy. The immediate priorities are stark: finding food, securing shelter, and protecting the group. In such a landscape, what happens to the more refined arts, the complex understanding of the stars, the sophisticated techniques for shaping stone, or the deep botanical wisdom needed to cultivate crops? These are not luxuries, they are the building blocks of civilization itself, and they are frighteningly fragile. Some researchers propose that the Great Flood, or the climatic chaos that followed, did not just drown land and scatter people, it created a profound cultural bottleneck. Imagine a vast library burning. A few precious scrolls might be saved by those fleeing the flames, but the interconnected web of knowledge, the context, the catalogues, the master librarians who knew where everything was, that is lost forever. The survivors are left with fragments, brilliant but disconnected pieces of a much larger puzzle. This is not a search for lost super technologies or ancient aliens. It is a more grounded, and in some ways more tragic, inquiry. We are looking for the ghost of a curriculum, the shadow of skills that once were commonplace, but had to be painfully reinvented millennia later. The clues are not in futuristic machinery, but in the silent testimony of stone and earth. Consider the mysterious site of Gunung Padang in Indonesia. To the casual observer, it is a hill covered in ancient stone terraces. But geological surveys using ground-penetrating radar suggest something far more complex. The data indicates that these megalithic structures are not just sitting on the hill, they are built into it with layers of construction that may date back an astonishing 12,000 years or more. If verified, this would place its origins right in the window of our cataclysm. The sophistication is not in alien technology, but in the sheer understanding of geology, engineering, and communal labor it represents. How did these people quarry, shape, and move such massive stones? What knowledge of stability and sacred geometry did they possess? And if this site is as old as some evidence suggests, where is the clear cultural lineage that led to it? Its story seems to emerge almost fully formed and then fade as if the thread of that knowledge was severed. Then look across the world to the foundations of the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 4,500 years ago, is a marvel of later Egyptian civilization. But beneath the sands around it, archaeologists have found something curious: massive stone blocks fitted together with such precision that a razor blade cannot slide between them. This style of masonry, far more intricate than the pyramid blocks themselves, appears in older, less famous structures. It is a signature of a specific, highly advanced stone working technique. The mainstream explanation is that this skill evolved within early dynastic Egypt. Yet, a compelling alternative hypothesis wonders: could this represent the lingering echo of a much older, refined craft? A craft that was already ancient when the first pharaohs came to power, a surviving fragment of pre-flood knowledge preserved and applied by the brilliant architects of a new age. We see similar fingerprints in the Andes at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo in Peru. Here, enormous stones, some weighing hundreds of tons, are locked together in jigsaw puzzle walls. The blocks are not rectangular, they are polygonal, with complex, interlocking shapes that fit together with a precision that defies simple explanation. The conventional narrative says this was achieved by the Inca Empire just a few centuries before the Spanish arrival. But the question persists: how did they achieve such mastery so quickly? Could it be that they were not inventing from scratch, but rediscovering and adapting a much older tradition of megalithic construction, a tradition that perhaps originated in a forgotten time when such skills were more widely known? This pattern repeats with agriculture. The domestication of plants like wheat, barley, and rice is presented as a brilliant, simultaneous invention in several places around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. But what if it was not an invention, but a rediscovery? What if the survivors of the cataclysm, carrying scattered seeds and half-remembered lore from their drowned fertile homelands, spent generations relearning the art of cultivation? The sudden, simultaneous appearance of agriculture in the archaeological record could mark not the dawn of the idea, but the moment the knowledge was finally pieced back together to a sustainable degree. This is the essence of the cultural bottleneck. It is not that humanity was reduced to grunting cavemen. It is that the dense, interconnected network of specialized knowledge was shattered. The astronomer who understood the precession of the equinoxes might not have survived alongside the master stonemason who knew how to resonate stones to shape them. The botanist who selectively bred grains may have been separated from the engineer who designed irrigation. Each surviving group held a piece of the puzzle, but the picture on the box was lost. For centuries, perhaps millennia, the focus was necessarily on the basics of survival. The higher arts went dormant, preserved only in cryptic myth, ritual, or in the stubborn, unexplained perfection of a few surviving monuments that later cultures would look upon with awe, attributing them to gods or giants. The true legacy of the flood, therefore, may not be a sunken continent, but a sunken library of human ingenuity. Our ancestors were not primitive, they were survivors, and in their scattered, resilient communities, they carried the precious, fragmented seeds of a world they once knew, seeds that would one day, slowly and painstakingly, be planted again. A story can outlast empires. For over 400 generations, long before the invention of writing, our ancestors preserved their most important memories not on clay or stone, but in the living library of the human voice. This is the power of oral tradition, a sophisticated and dynamic system of knowledge transfer that modern science is only beginning to fully appreciate. It is not a game of telephone where details blur into nonsense. In cultures built around this practice, stories are sacred vessels, recited with meticulous care, passed from elder to youth in ritualized settings to ensure their precise transmission. Within these narratives, vital information is encoded, not as a dry list of facts, but as a compelling story of heroes, animals, and landscapes, making the lessons unforgettable. The global flood myth stands as perhaps the most powerful testament to this system's endurance. Its persistence across continents suggests it was not just any tale, but a piece of data deemed so critical, so essential for survival, that countless cultures independently chose to safeguard it above all else. It functions as a core memory, a warning from the deepest layers of our shared past. Research into oral traditions has revealed their astonishing accuracy over timescales that challenge our assumptions. Indigenous Australian cultures, for example, maintain stories about coastal landscapes that are now far inland, descriptions that geologists have confirmed match the shorelines from over 7,000 years ago, when sea levels were dramatically lower. These are not vague legends, they are specific accounts of particular bays, islands, and river mouths that have been submerged for millennia. Similarly, Native American tribes of the Pacific Northwest tell of a time when the ground shook violently and a great wave consumed the coast, narratives that align with geological evidence for massive earthquakes and tsunamis in the region centuries before European contact. These oral histories have been cross-checked with sediment cores and tree ring data, and the correlation is often startlingly precise. The stories preserve the event, the location, and even the time of year it occurred. This demonstrates that oral tradition is capable of holding complex environmental memories for thousands of years, transforming from a mere curiosity into a legitimate historical record. This changes how we must view the flood myths. If a culture can accurately preserve the memory of a tsunami for 1,000 years, what might be retained from a cataclysm 4 or 5 times older? The sheer effort required to maintain a story across 400 generations is immense. It means every parent, every storyteller for 12,000 years believed this particular narrative was important enough to teach their children. They chose this story again and again over all the other events and lessons of their lives. The global distribution becomes the key clue. Isolated cultures from the Amazon rainforest to the Arctic tundra did not trade this story like a commodity. They each cultivated their own version from a seed of lived experience. The common core, the world being cleansed or reset by water, with a few survivors tasked with beginning anew, points to a shared origin in reality. The story was the technology they used to transmit a traumatic, world-altering event. It packaged the trauma into a manageable form with a moral framework and a lesson for the future. Do not build your home on the low ground. Respect the power of the sea and the sky. Be prepared, for the world can change in a day. So when we listen to these ancient stories today, we are not hearing fairy tales. We are accessing a data stream from the Pleistocene, a broadcast sent forward in time by people who witnessed the unthinkable. They took the raw sensory overload of a collapsing world, the roar of water, the darkness of the ash-choked sky, the profound silence afterward, and they distilled it into narrative. They gave the chaos a name, a reason, and a consequence. In doing so, they performed the most human of acts. They created meaning from catastrophe. The flood myth is their legacy, a message in a bottle washed up on the shore of the present. It tells us that they endured, that they remembered, and that they desperately wanted us to know what they knew. The water is not just a punishment, it is a teacher. The Ark is not just a boat, it is a blueprint for resilience. This oral tradition was their only hard drive, and the flood story was the most critical file they saved. They ensured it would never be deleted, encoding it into the very fabric of culture itself, so that no matter how many times civilization had to reboot, the warning would always remain. Water can rewrite the climate of a planet. The great deluges from collapsing ice sheets did more than drown coastlines. They may have thrown a critical switch in the Earth's own temperature regulation system. This system is called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, often described as the planet's great oceanic conveyor belt. Picture a slow, majestic river within the sea, not flowing east or west, but in a continuous loop from the tropics to the Arctic and back. Warm, salty surface water travels north from the equator, carrying immense heat toward Europe. As it reaches the cold, high latitudes near Greenland and Iceland, it cools. Cooling makes the water denser, so it sinks, plunging down into the deep ocean. This sinking action is the engine of the entire system, pulling more warm water northward behind it to replace it. This conveyor belt is why London, which is as far north as frigid parts of Canada, enjoys a relatively mild climate. It is a massive natural heat pump, and for thousands of years it ran with a steady rhythm. Then the flood came. The theory suggests that the catastrophic outbursts from lakes like Agassiz did not just send water across the land. They delivered a colossal, sudden injection of cold, fresh water directly into the North Atlantic, right over the engine room where the sinking occurs. Fresh water is lighter than salty water. This enormous freshwater lid acted like a cork, floating on the surface and preventing the dense, salty water from sinking. The engine stalled. With no sinking, the northward pull of warm tropical water weakened dramatically. The heat pump, in effect, switched off. The consequences were not local. They were hemispheric. Without that steady delivery of oceanic warmth, temperatures across the northern hemisphere plummeted. This is the climatic signature we see etched in ice cores from Greenland, a rapid descent into cold that marks the beginning of the Younger Dryas period. The cooling was not a gentle decline, it was a sharp, jarring shift that lasted for over 1,000 years. So the initial cataclysm, whether triggered by impact or instability, set off a devastating chain reaction. First came the fire and the flood, an immediate, violent reshaping of the world. Then came the long, silent winter. For the scattered bands of survivors, this was a double catastrophe. They had just endured the trauma of losing their world to water. Now they faced a deepening cold that would have withered plants, altered animal migration routes, and made every source of food more scarce. A generation that remembered green valleys now raised children under a grayer, colder sky. This climatic domino effect turns a geological event into a prolonged human ordeal. It provides an elegant explanation for why the cold snap happened so abruptly and why it persisted for so long. The flood was not merely a destructive force, it was a climatic trigger, demonstrating how a single, violent event in one part of the world could reach out and grip an entire hemisphere in an icy fist for centuries. The environment itself had become an adversary, and survival now meant adapting not just to a changed map, but to a fundamentally altered sky. The archaeological record is not a continuous film, but a series of faded snapshots, many of them missing. When we look closely at the layers of Earth dated to around 12,000 years ago, we find something puzzling in many parts of the world, not a sudden leap forward, but what appears to be a step back. In North America, the story of the Clovis people, known for their distinctive, beautifully fluted spear points, comes to an abrupt end. The points vanish from the record. Following that layer, the tools we find are often simpler, less standardized, as if the knowledge of that specific, refined craft was lost or no longer a priority. A similar pattern emerges in Europe. The vibrant cave art and sophisticated toolkits of the late Ice Age give way to a period with fewer artistic expressions and more utilitarian implements. This is not a global, uniform dark age, but a patchwork of regional silences and simplifications. It suggests a profound disruption, a breaking of chains that had once connected teachers to apprentices and one community to the next across vast distances. When your world is upended, survival narrows the focus to the immediate and the essential. The exquisite artistry of a finely crafted blade is a luxury when you are struggling to find your next meal. The energy required to maintain wide trade networks for special stones or shells evaporates when every group is fighting for its own patch of stable ground. What we may be seeing in these archaeological gaps is the footprint of a society in retreat, forced to localize, to simplify, and to pour all its ingenuity into the bare mechanics of staying alive. This period, sometimes called the missing millennium, could represent a time of cultural amnesia. Specialized skills faded as the elders who held them passed away without apprentices to teach. Stories and rituals that depended on specific landscapes were forgotten when those landscapes sank beneath the waves. Communities turned inward, their horizons shrinking from continental trade routes to the next valley over. This fragmentation is a silent, powerful testament to the scale of the hardship. It was not merely a bad season or a difficult migration. It was a reset that forced human knowledge through a bottleneck, where only the most vital, portable information made it through to the other side. The simplification of tools is not a sign of lesser intelligence, but of devastating context. It is the archaeological signature of a people starting over, piece by piece, from the fragments they managed to carry with them from a drowned world. Water holds a secret language understood by every human heart. It is the ultimate paradox, the element that gives life and yet can take everything away in an instant. This dual nature is the very reason the flood myth resonates so deeply, far beyond any single historical event. The story's power lies not just in its memory of destruction, but in its profound symbolic architecture, a blueprint for transformation that mirrors the most sacred journeys of the human spirit. Think of the classic narrative arc. First, there is a world grown corrupt, stagnant, or out of balance. Then comes the deluge, a terrifying but total cleansing. From the waters, a select few emerge, carrying the seeds of the old world into a new one, where they enter into a covenant, a sacred promise, and begin again. This is not merely a sequence of events, it is a spiritual initiation written on a planetary scale. The floodwaters in this symbolic reading represent a forced baptism. They are the chaotic, overwhelming power that dissolves the old, flawed reality so that a new, purified one can be born. In countless cultural and religious traditions, water serves this exact purpose. It is used in rituals of birth, welcoming a new soul into the community. It is central to rites of passage, marking the death of an old identity and the birth of a new one. And in practices of spiritual cleansing, water washes away impurity, not of the body but of the soul. The great flood myth elevates this personal ritual to a cosmic level. The entire world is immersed, not in a font or a river, but in the ocean of chaos itself. The survival of the chosen family, then, is not about their moral superiority in a simple sense, but represents the survival of consciousness itself through a trial of unimaginable magnitude. They are the enduring spark of awareness that passes through the watery void of dissolution and emerges, gasping, on the other side. This is why the story concludes not with a simple happy ending, but with a covenant, often symbolized by the rainbow. The covenant is the lesson learned, the new contract with existence. It is the promise that such total dissolution will not come again without warning, but it is also the responsibility placed upon the survivors to live differently, to remember the balance. This transforms the catastrophe from a random act of violence into a meaningful, if terribly severe, lesson. It gives the suffering a purpose. The cycle of corruption, destruction, and rebirth mirrors the natural world we see every year, the death of winter giving way to the explosion of life in spring. It mirrors the human experience of overcoming profound personal loss, where the old self is washed away by grief, and a new, often wiser, self must be painfully built from the remnants. By sanctifying this story, our ancestors were doing something brilliant. They were encoding a powerful psychological and spiritual truth into a memorable narrative. The flood was not just something that happened to them, it became something that happens within us all. It is the story of any great crisis that forces a total restart, any period of darkness that must be endured before a new dawn. This symbolic depth may be the true reason the story was carried across 400 generations. It was not just a warning about rising seas, it was a guidebook for the soul, a map for navigating the inevitable periods of total upheaval in life and in history. The water that destroys is the same water that purifies, and in that terrifying, beautiful duality, our ancestors found a meaning strong enough to withstand the flood of time itself. The search for our past is now guided by eyes that can see through earth and water. Modern technology has given us tools that border on the magical, allowing us to scan the planet's skin for the faintest scars of ancient trauma. One of the most revolutionary is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine flying a specialized laser scanner over a dense, impenetrable jungle canopy. The laser pulses penetrate the leaves, bouncing off the ground below, and a computer assembles millions of these reflections into a precise, three-dimensional map of the hidden terrain. Across Central and South America, LiDAR has revealed sprawling, forgotten cities and complex road networks swallowed by the rainforest for centuries. While these are more recent than our cataclysm, the principle is profound. It proves that entire civilizations can vanish from sight, leaving only a subtle imprint on the landscape, waiting for the right technology to reveal them. This same method is now being applied to search for even older structures, the potential footprints of societies that existed before the great turning point. LiDAR strips away the veil of time, showing us a world we never knew was there. Beneath the waves, another kind of pulse listens for echoes of lost worlds. Sophisticated sonar systems mounted on research vessels paint ghostly pictures of the seafloor with astonishing clarity. They do not just show a flat plain, they reveal the intricate topography of drowned landscapes in stunning detail. We can now trace the meandering paths of ancient river channels that once cut across continental shelves, see the outlines of submerged lakes, and identify potential sites where human artifacts might lie preserved under layers of sediment. This is not guesswork, it is high-resolution cartography of a vanished geography. By combining this sonar data with core samples, scientists can reconstruct the ecology of these lost lands, understanding what plants grew there and what animals roamed, building a picture of the environments that were so catastrophically flooded. This technology transforms the ocean floor from a mysterious abyss into a readable, if silent, historical document. The detective work goes even deeper to the molecular level. Geochemists now have instruments sensitive enough to analyze the atomic fingerprints within ancient layers of ice, soil, and rock. They can measure minute variations in isotopes, trace the global spread of wildfire soot, and identify the exotic materials left by a potential cosmic impact with far greater precision than ever before. One of the most ambitious quests driven by this technology is the search for the Younger Dryas impact crater. For years, the lack of a definitive crater was a major point of skepticism. But in 2018, scientists using ice-penetrating radar announced a stunning discovery beneath the Greenland ice sheet, a massive, bowl-shaped depression under the Hiawatha Glacier. This feature, over 30 kilometers wide, matches the profile of an impact crater. While its exact age is still being confirmed through painstaking analysis of the sediments at its base, the possibility is electrifying. It represents a tangible candidate for the cosmic trigger, a potential ground zero hidden under a mile of ice. Researchers are now drilling to retrieve samples from beneath the crater, looking for the telltale signs of shock and heat that would lock the story in place. This convergence of technologies, LiDAR, sonar, and geochemistry, is transforming the investigation. What was once a fringe idea, debated through myth and scattered geological oddities, is now a mainstream, interdisciplinary scientific pursuit. Archaeologists, geologists, climatologists, and astronomers are pooling data, building computer models, and testing specific, falsifiable predictions. The question is no longer simply, did something happen? The question is, what exactly happened, in what sequence, and with what global consequences? We are moving from speculation to simulation, using supercomputers to model the effects of an impact on the ice sheets, to track the flow of meltwater pulses, and to calculate the climatic shock to the ocean conveyor belt. Each new data point, each refined model, brings us closer to a coherent narrative of that pivotal epoch. This technological revolution does more than just hunt for evidence. It reframes our entire relationship with deep history. It allows us to test the flood hypothesis with a rigor our ancestors could never have imagined. We are no longer just interpreting stories. We are reading the planet's own diary, written in layers of ice, sediment, and stone. The tools in our hands are finally becoming delicate enough to listen to the whispers of a catastrophe 12,000 years old, turning the echoes of myth into the clear, measured language of data. The ancient flood story is no longer just a tale from the past. It is a mirror held up to our present. Our ancestors lived through a climatic disaster they could neither predict nor control, a sudden rewriting of their world by forces that must have felt divine. We now face a transformation of our own making, a slow-moving but undeniable shift in the global climate driven by human activity. The parallel is not in the cause, but in the consequence, and more importantly, in the human response. The stories they left behind are not relics, they are case studies in resilience. They tell us how a species, when pushed to the brink, can fracture, adapt, and ultimately find a new path forward. That same capacity for adaptation is our greatest inheritance, but it is paired with a new responsibility they never had: foresight. We possess something our ancestors lacked: a detailed record of the past and the science to model the future. We can read the warning signs in the ice cores and the sediment layers that they could only experience as unfolding catastrophe. The geological record shows us what happens when planetary systems are pushed past a tipping point, when freshwater floods stall ocean currents, when temperatures plunge or soar. Our climate models, for all their complexity, are attempts to chart those same dangerous currents before we are swept into them. This is the profound shift. We are no longer passive subjects of the Earth's cycles. We have become active participants in them. The question is whether we will participate as stewards or as a force of chaos. This understanding moves the discussion from one of doom to one of agency. Studying ancient collapse is not about confirming a fatalistic prophecy. It is about cultivating the humility to see our own civilization as part of a long, fragile story. Those lost coastal plains and scattered cultures remind us that no society, no matter how advanced it feels, is permanently anchored. The true lesson is about the fragility of complex systems and the profound importance of memory. Our ancestors encoded their trauma into myth to ensure it would never be forgotten, to arm future generations with the story of what water can do. We have encoded our knowledge in data, in peer-reviewed studies, and in satellite imagery. The challenge is whether we will heed our own warnings with the same solemnity they reserved for divine commandments. Resilience is not about building higher walls against the sea, though that is part of it. It is about building more flexible, more compassionate, and more intelligent societies. It is about diversifying our food systems, decentralizing our energy grids, and honoring the traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous cultures who have maintained balance for millennia. The survivors of the Younger Dryas did not save their technology, they saved their adaptability. They learned to read new landscapes, to forge new social compacts, and to find meaning in a changed world. Our task is similar, but we have the chance to do it with intention before the crisis is fully upon us. We must learn to read the subtle signals in our own atmosphere and oceans with the same acute attention they paid to the behavior of animals and the flow of rivers. Ultimately, the echo of that ancient flood asks us a single, haunting question. Are we listening? Are we listening to the scientists who interpret the planet's vital signs? Are we listening to the coastal communities who watch their homelands erode? And are we listening to the deep, archetypal wisdom in those old stories? which remind us that renewal is always possible, but only after a profound reckoning with the consequences of our actions. The myth ends not with the flood, but with the rainbow, a symbol of a hard-won promise. Our promise is still being written, not in the sky, but in the choices we make every day. The cataclysm of 12,000 years ago reshaped humanity. The one we now face will test whether we finally learned its lessons. The pieces of this ancient puzzle now lie scattered before us. A thin black stripe in the soil whispers of a sky on fire. Immense dry waterfalls in Washington state roar with the memory of a vanished inland sea. Sonar maps reveal the ghostly river valleys of Doggerland, silent beneath the North Sea. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe stand as a silent, deliberate mystery from the very edge of that lost time. And through it all, a chorus of voices from every corner of the globe repeats the same essential story, a world cleansed by water. Individually, each piece of evidence can be questioned. Each thread has an alternative explanation. The nanodiamonds might have another source. The megafauna could have fallen to human hunters and a changing climate. The flood myths might simply be archetypes born from local river overflows. This is the healthy, necessary skepticism of science. Yet when you step back and view these threads not in isolation, but woven together, a pattern emerges that is difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. The convergence is the key. It is the alignment of a cosmic impact signature with a sudden climatic reversal. The timing of massive meltwater pulses with the drowning of continental shelves, and the global distribution of a cataclysmic flood narrative among cultures with no possible contact. This alignment suggests these are not separate events, but different facets of a single, protracted catastrophe. The cataclysmic flood theory, therefore, is best understood not as a proven historical fact, but as a powerful new paradigm. It is a lens. For over a century, the dominant lens through which we viewed deep history was gradualism, the calm and steady accumulation of small changes over immense time. That lens brought us incredible understanding, but it also made us dismiss certain evidence like the Channeled Scablands because it did not fit the expected picture. The cataclysm lens asks us to consider a different possibility, that our planet's history, and by extension our own, is not always a smooth curve. It can be a graph with sharp, jagged spikes, moments where the rules change overnight. This paradigm does not seek to replace science with myth, but to use the hints within myth to ask better scientific questions. It takes the enduring human story and uses it to guide us towards specific geological and archaeological investigations. Where should we look for impact proxies? In the layers right at the Younger Dryas boundary. What landscapes might hold clues of early societies, the now submerged continental shelves? Why did agriculture arise so suddenly in multiple locations, perhaps as a necessary reinvention after a loss of stable, resource-rich coastal territories? This lens brings disparate, puzzling data into a sharper, more interconnected focus. The buried sanctuary, the extinct giants, the rising seas, and the stories of the Ark, they stop being isolated curiosities and start to feel like parts of a single, epic narrative. A narrative of a world struck, frozen, and then drowned, forcing its inhabitants to adapt or perish. This view challenges the comfortable notion of a linear, predictable ascent from primitivism to civilization. It suggests instead a story of resilience and amnesia, of brilliance fragmented and painfully reassembled. It proposes that before the dawn of recorded history, humanity faced a trial by water and ice, a bottleneck that shaped our psychology, our myths, and perhaps even our drive to build, remember, and warn those who would come after. The evidence may never be conclusive enough to satisfy every skeptic, and perhaps it should not be. The true value of this synthesis is that it opens a door. It invites us to reconsider the quiet places in our past not as empty pages, but as pages that were tragically erased, with only the faintest watermark still visible. It allows us to listen to the flood myths not as childish fables, but as the solemn testimonies of survivors, encoded for transmission across 400 generations. In the end, this is not a search for a lost city of gold or a forgotten super technology. It is a search for context, for a deeper understanding of why we tell the stories we do, and how a single, terrible chapter in the Earth's diary might have set the stage for everything that followed. The cataclysm, whether proven or not, offers a profound reminder of our place within a dynamic and sometimes violent planetary system, and of the incredible, fragile thread of memory that connects us to those who stood on the shore, watched the waters rise, and lived to tell the tale. Science now stands at the edge of that submerged world, armed with questions sharper than any spear point. The grand synthesis of fire, ice, and flood is compelling, but it is not yet complete. Critical pieces of the puzzle remain stubbornly absent, their absence fueling both skepticism and a thrilling new era of exploration. The most prominent gap is a hole in the ground, or rather, under the ice. Where is the definitive impact crater? The discovery of the depression under Greenland's Hiawatha, a glacier, is tantalizing, but confirming its age and origin is a monumental task. Drilling through a mile of ancient ice to sample the rock beneath is a feat of polar engineering, a delicate operation to retrieve a time capsule from the moment of the catastrophe itself. Until that sample is analyzed and its story told, the cosmic trigger hypothesis remains a powerful suspect, not a convicted culprit. The search is not over, with scientists now scanning other likely locations, from the ocean floor to remote tundra, for other potential scars left by that fateful encounter. Beneath the waves lies an even more profound mystery, one that speaks directly to the human cost. Can we find the homes of those who were displaced? The continental shelves are not just drowned geography, they are potentially the world's largest, least explored archaeological site. Finding direct evidence of coastal settlements from 13,000 years ago is the ultimate goal. Imagine discovering the stone tools, the hearths, or the ceremonial sites of a community that lived on the fertile plains of Doggerland or the Persian Gulf Oasis. This is not a search for mythical Atlantis, but for the tangible, everyday remains of real people who watched their world change. The technology to find these sites exists, in the form of advanced submersibles and sediment-penetrating sonar. Yet the challenge is immense. Sea level rise did not gently bury these landscapes. It often scoured them with powerful currents, scattering artifacts and erasing the subtle traces of human habitation. Finding a campsite on the ocean floor is like looking for a single, specific grain of sand on a vast beach that has been churned by storms for millennia. The quest requires patience, funding, and a new generation of archaeologists who are as comfortable with a remote-operated vehicle as with a trowel. Then there is the enduring puzzle of the stories themselves. How do we move from noting a fascinating parallel to proving a direct link between a specific myth and a geological event? The connection is intuitive, but scientifically, it is a labyrinth. The path forward lies in a radical interdisciplinary collaboration, a conversation between geologists who can date a shoreline's retreat and linguists who analyze the structure of an ancient flood narrative. Could we, for instance, use climate models to pinpoint the region where a rapid, localized flooding event occurred around 12,000 years ago, and then trace the migration routes of peoples from that region, following the evolution of their language and their foundational stories? It is a long shot, but it represents a new way of thinking where oral tradition is treated not as folklore, but as a data set containing encrypted environmental history. The goal is to find a story so specific in its details, the description of a particular mountain shape or a river's bend, that it matches a now submerged feature we can map with sonar. That would be a whisper from the past perfectly deciphered. The future of this mystery, therefore, rests on three frontiers. First, the deep drill, seeking answers in ice cores from Greenland and sediment cores from the Gulf of Mexico, each layer a page in a climate diary. Second, the supercomputer, running increasingly refined models to simulate the precise effects of a meltwater pulse on ocean currents, or the climatic aftermath of a fragmented comet impact. These models allow us to test the cataclysm hypothesis against the hard rules of physics, asking not just if it could have happened, but exactly how it would have unfolded. And third, the ocean frontier, the most romantic and daunting of all. Systematic underwater archaeology of our continental shelves is a project for the coming century, a slow, meticulous scanning of our own lost horizons. It is driven by a simple, powerful urge, the desire to know what was there before the map was redrawn by water. This is not merely academic curiosity. Understanding how humanity endured a planetary shock of that magnitude is a study in resilience. It shows us the fragility of complex systems, both ecological and social, and the incredible adaptability that allowed our species not just to survive, but to eventually build anew from the fragments. The search continues because the story is our own. Every core sample pulled from the deep, every new scan of a seabed, is an attempt to read a missing chapter in the autobiography of humankind, written in stone, ice, and the enduring power of memory. The final pieces of this ancient story do not fit neatly into a single box. Our journey reveals the flood of 12,000 years ago is not a simple event to be proven or disproven, but a profound, multidisciplinary puzzle at the very heart of the human experience. Whether understood as a literal global deluge or a composite memory of rapid, catastrophic environmental change, its impact is undeniable. It shaped the geography of our continents, scattered and reformed our earliest societies, and echoes through our oldest stories as a foundational lesson. This cataclysm may have been the crucible that forged a new kind of human resilience, forcing innovation, compressing cultures, and embedding a deep awareness of nature's power into our collective psyche. As we reflect on this distant chapter, we are reminded of two enduring truths. The first is the incredible adaptability of our species, the capacity to endure unthinkable hardship, to preserve memory through story, and to rebuild from fragments. The second is the humbling power of the planet itself, a dynamic system where ice, water, and climate are linked in a delicate dance, capable of sudden and dramatic change. The flood narrative, in all its forms, is a bridge between these truths. It is a testament to survival and a timeless warning about the fragility of our place in the world. It challenges us to listen to the science that reads the Earth's past and to the ancient voices that carried the memory forward, not as a myth, but as a message. Thank you for exploring this deep mystery. If this journey through time, science, and story sparked your curiosity, please subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest enigmas. We would love to hear your thoughts on the flood theory in the comments below.